back.
Civilized conversation should never happen in Scotland.
Just to make the Prime Minister.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. You too.
So much.
My pleasure. You're for sitting in?
Justin.
Justin.
It's, this is the sort of thing that the humanities needs.
I agree.
It's that stability and that ability to see human everybody. That's the first thought that comes across my mind when I see stuff. It's like, well, what about this group? Everybody's a little bit.
Holly.
H-O-L-Y.
No I's or IVs.
No.
A lifetime of thought about the timeless principles of human flourishing. My book is about the most important question of our day, which is how do we flourish across deep difference? And what does that look like in practice, even in a very divided moment like we're in right now, where the stakes feel really high in times of election, in times of war? What do we owe the other? What is the bare minimum of respect we owe the other by virtue of our shared personhood and shared dignity? And what does it look like in practice, again, even when the stakes are high, even when we deeply disagree? So I came by my interest in this topic, honestly. My mother, also my photographer and my publicist and my best friend, she's called Judy the Manners Lady. So she's an international expert on etiquette and manners. I was raised in this home that was attentive and mindful of social norms and social expectations, raised in the ways and means of politeness and etiquette. I learned while writing this book, actually, that my mother is one of 4 women who are internationally renowned experts on manners and etiquette, named Judy. Like there are 4 women walking the this earth right now, maybe more. I mean, who knows? The most famous is probably Miss Manners. Her name is Judith Martin. She's longtime Washington Post columnist. But there are 2 others. Oddly enough, they also all have ties to Boston. I don't know if you knew that one. But my mother, she uses song to reach children. And she'll go into a school, into an assembly, and she'll also do like customer service training. And my mom is passionate about this project of doing life together, and she cares about manners to the extent that they foster this beautiful and sometimes often fraught thing called life together with others. This won't surprise Matt, but I am constitutionally allergic to authority. I hate rules. I hate being told what to do. Even to this day, if someone tells me to do something, my immediate instinct is to wonder why. Like, what's the rationale behind this expectation? And so when my mother taught us how to set the table, how to cut our food, how to hold our fork, I wanted to know why. Why are we using forks at all? Is it just because some self-appointed authority at some place in some point in time decided that we should? And is that the best way to do things? And so I always questioned these norms and expectations, drove my mother absolutely bonkers. But my mother's also this incredible model of hospitality, of true civility, of kindness to the stranger, of our home growing up was a revolving door, of newcomers to our communities, of homestays, of immigrants. And so in addition to teaching us to mind our P's and Q's, she was also just very much embodied the spirit of the true soul of civility, as I unpack it in my book. So despite questioning these rules of propriety my entire life, I generally followed them. My mother promised that manners and politeness would serve me well in work and school and life, and she was right. Until I got to the United States Department of Education. I worked in federal government from 2017 to 2018 and in Washington, D.C. And when I was in government, I was surrounded by these 2 extremes. On one hand, I saw people who had sharp elbows, and they were hostile, and they were coercive, and they were willing to just bully anyone to get ahead and get what they wanted. And on the other hand, I saw people who at first I thought were my people. They were polished and poised and polite, but these were the people who would smile at me one moment and stab me in the back the next. And this second contingent really perplexed me, because one thing my mother had said growing up was that manners mattered because they were an outward expression of our inward character. And yet here I was, surrounded by people who who were well-mannered enough and yet ruthless and cruel. It's interesting, like this happened when I was in Washington, D.C., but I also worked in the Prime Minister's office here in Ottawa. I was just a lowly intern in the spring of 2013. Stephen Harper was Prime Minister then, and I saw these same dynamics at play. It doesn't really matter, what country you're in, what era you're in, what part of the world you're in, what vocation you're in. That the human condition is the human condition. It doesn't matter what time or place that you're in. That there's this duality to our nature that makes civility a timeless problem that I'll get to in a second. But anyway, after I left government, I was deeply disillusioned, deeply discouraged by the divided state of our world, and I hungered to be more part of the solution. I didn't feel like I was being part of the solution in government, and so I thought deeply. Like, I had been raised in this intellectually omnivorous home. My parents both are very well educated. They have multiple graduate degrees and just a high level of educational attainment, but they knew that a true education didn't necessarily happen in the classroom. That they modeled for us that a true education was about curiosity, it was about lifelong learning, and that learning was a lifestyle, education was a lifestyle, it was a way of engaging with others in the world with wonder and with curiosity, and they modeled that for us, which I'm very grateful for. So I was raised, like my father would read to us about Plato's theory of the forms at night, and my mother was teaching us Hebrew and Greek and Latin like before we could barely speak English, and just very grateful to have had that sort of upbringing. But I had a chance to revisit all these thinkers that had really formed me and nourished me and guided me throughout my life and my education, my formation, from Plato to St. Augustine to Dostoevsky and Hebrew Bible, sacred scripture. And it caused me, and I zoomed out, like I had been in this environment of anti-human flourishing, and I zoomed out and thought, like, what does it mean to be human? What is the bare minimum of respect that we are owed to others by virtue of our shared humanity and dignity as human beings? And what does that look like in practice? Again, even in a very divided time, when the stakes feel really high, and even when we deeply disagree. And that's kind of the moral foundation of my philosophy, of my theory of civility, which I define as the bare minimum of respect that we are owed to others by virtue of our shared personhood, by virtue of our dignity. This experience in government, again, seeing the extreme hostility on one hand, the extreme politeness on the other hand, it clarifies several things for me. One, these seem like two extremes. They seem like two poles on opposite sides of the spectrum, but they're actually very similar. We were talking about Plato a moment ago. What these poles illuminate, and they are symptoms of disordered loves. In his Republic, Plato said that a just society is comprised of just souls, well-ordered souls, where the head rules the belly through the chest, where the rational wisdom, ideally loving part, rules the passions and the instincts through thumos, through courage, through discipline, through restraint, and that is what a just soul is like. And he said that a society of just souls is a just society. St. Augustine, Plato was a pagan, he was Greek, he was pre-Christian, but St. Augustine was a theist. He was a theologian, a philosopher, and he was a Neoplatonist, so he took those ideas and many others of Plato's and he baptized it. And he analogized that to the Christian ideal of a rightly ordered soul, which is based on Christ's dual commandment: loving God, loving others, loving self. That's also a version of this vision of an ordered soul, a just soul that again supports and comprises a just society. And what these two extremes in government revealed is a chronic epidemic of disordered souls. Both modes saw other human beings as means to their selfish ends, as opposed to human beings who are worthy of respect in and of themselves, just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. The aggressive and hostile contingent saw others as pawns to be bowled over in order to get whatever they wanted. And the polite contingent saw others as pawns to be manipulated in order to get what they wanted. And both had an insufficiently high view of the other, of the human person, and treated them with insufficient respect that they are owed by virtue of their humanity. So the first thing I realized was that, again, they seem like polar opposites, but they're actually very similar. Both instrumentalize others and reflect disordered loves, and those disordered, that pathology, that disordered loves that I saw in government, that defines a lot of the disorder that we see in public life today, where people are willing to instrumentalize others, harass them, bully them, or manipulate them, and suppress them, and tone police them, silence them in order to get what they want in life. And so, in many ways, our society today is emblematic of that disordered loves that we have as citizens. In Canada and America and everywhere where it feels really divided and the stakes feel really high. Another thing that this experience taught me was that there is an essential distinction between civility and politeness. Politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's behavior, it's external. Civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals, who again are worthy of the bare minimum of respect, just by virtue of being human. Crucially, sometimes actually respecting someone requires being impolite. It requires engaging in robust debate, and requires telling hard truths. That's what the university classroom that we're in right now is designed for. That's a way to actually respect someone. To say, I respect you enough that I'm going to take your ideas seriously. And I'm not going to patronize you by pretending indifference doesn't exist here when it does. I'm not going to silence you. I'm going to let you speak your truth as well, but we're going to have a conversation. And we're not going to let that conversation devolve to the point of ad hominem attack, devolve to the point of violence, of name-calling, of imbuing an intent and malice in your motives, that we're just going to have an honest conversation between two equals, two moral equals, and we're going to disagree, and that's how we are embodying that respect for one another. So, difference between civility and politeness, core argument of my book, and something that was really made clear to me during my time in government. So, this problem, how do we flourish even when we differ, even when we deeply disagree? This is, again, the most important question of our day, but it's not a new question. This is the defining question of the classical liberal project. How do we live in a pluralist society with different priorities, different values, different aims? This is the defining question of democracy. This is the defining question of our human species. How, because as long as we've been around as a species, we have come together in groups. We are socially resilient. We are doggedly social. We are a profoundly social species. We know that we do better. We're more likely to survive and thrive in relationship and in community with others. And that is why in all times and places, people always come together in relationship and in community. And yet, morally and biologically, we are driven to meet our own needs before others. And that those two facets of ourselves are in tension. There is this duality to us, that the social and the selfish, the self-love is in tension. And that is why this project, the human social project, this joint project of living well with others, is always fragile. That's why friendship, democracy, civilization itself is always fragile. It is never a foregone conclusion. I don't know if any of you are married in this room, the students rather, but marriage at its core is a friendship. And the moment you put a marriage or a friendship or a democracy on autopilot, that's the beginning of the end. It requires vigilance, and so our role as members of this joint human social project is deciding every moment of every day to consider the needs of others alongside of ourselves, and often choosing to restrain what we actually might want for the sake of doing this thing called life together with others. I love the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Who in this room, raise your hands if you've read Robert Louis Stevenson. So in this famous novel, Dr. Jekyll is this illustrious and prominent physician in Scotland, And he's esteemed, wealthy, well-respected, handsome. Everyone adores him, and yet he has these baser instincts, these baser impulses. He says, and he creates this potion, he invents this potion that he can drink, and he drinks at night, and it allows him to transform into this monstrous and barbaric Mr. Hyde. And at night, he's allowed to let loose and let live and give life to his, most barbaric thoughts and passions without consequence. Murder and breaking into people's homes and wreaking havoc on society. And yet something peculiar happens. The more that Dr. Jekyll drinks the potion and transforms into Mr. Hyde at night, soon he begins to transform into Mr. Hyde without drinking the potion at all. St. Augustine, eventually he becomes overtaken by the barbaric and monstrous Mr. Hyde that kills him. St. Augustine's really great on this. He has a helpful explanation. St. Augustine says an expression of our self-love in our nature, he called the self-love in our nature, the incurvatus in se, the inward curve upon the self. That is a default, it's like gravity, it's just a de facto part of who we are, it's indelible part of the human character. That an unhappy manifestation of that incurvatus in se is what he called in his City of God, the libido dominandi. And the libido dominandi in Augustine's City of God is the lust to dominate. And the thing is, as we learn in the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that the lust to dominate, again, that we all share, because it's a part of our character, the lust to dominate others, the more we exercise it, the more we give life to it, as Dr. Jekyll did in drinking the potion time and time again. The lust to dominate becomes the dominating lust. That we become enslaved to the very lust that, the lust themselves. I love the story of, I know some of you have read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Gilgamesh. So I opened my book with the Epic of Gilgamesh. As many of you know, Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk. He's this part man, part god. And he is the king of civilization in a part of the world, ancient Sumeria, that is considered the cradle of civilization. He is the king of the most sophisticated urban center in the known world, and yet he's a monster. He is depraved, and he is cruel. He takes what he wants from whomever he wants, whenever he wants, without consequence, because he is a tyrant. And he's even infamous for this monstrous practice of first night's rights, taking a woman on her wedding night and sleeping with her, forcing himself on her before her husband could know her. The people of Uruk are tired of being tyrannized by Gilgamesh, and they cry out to the ancient Babylonian gods. They say, please help us, save us from Gilgamesh. And the gods hear their plea, and they create from clay Enkidu. Enkidu is this part man, part beast, like primal, hirsute, kind of uncultivated, uncivilized, primal human being. But Gilgamesh marches to Uruk and challenges Gilgamesh to a duel, and they fight long into the night. And the people of Uruk stand on and think, who's going to win? Finally, Gilgamesh wins. And then something quite remarkable happens. Enkidu extends a hand of friendship to Gilgamesh. And perhaps even more remarkably, Gilgamesh extends that hand of friendship. And in that moment, it marks a sort of moral transformation for Gilgamesh. That the offer of friendship transformed him. It gave him a motivation to overcome the ugliest aspects of his nature that he had indulged wantonly and been dominated by. But he was able to rise above that and become an ideal hero and king. And of course, as many of you know, the rest of the Epic of Gilgamesh is Enkidu and Gilgamesh going on all these adventures together as best friends. And again, Gilgamesh is transformed permanently into this ideal hero and king. And so there are several things about that story that are so powerful and so important to this conversation now. One of them is that Gilgamesh was the king of this ancient civilization, and again, in a place that was the cradle of civilization. And yet, can he really be said to be civilized if he was just acting like a total tyrant and was dominated by his lusts? I'd say no. Enkidu, by contrast, was close to earth, uncultivated, some might call more barbaric, more savage, more bestial, and yet he had this milk of human goodness within him, that he was the defender of the poor and the vulnerable and oppressed that Gilgamesh tyrannized. And so I like to invert these expectations and conversations about civilization and civility and what it means to be truly civilized. And it's more about how we treat the vulnerable, how we treat the other, the humanity of our conduct. How we treat those human beings who have moral equality to us. And the reality is that we have a little bit of Gilgamesh, a little bit of that libido dominandi, and a little bit of Enkidu, a little bit of that milk of human goodness, that altruism in each of us. That it's not duality, like us versus them, like they're uncivilized and barbaric, and we are the civilized, because that language of civility and being a civilized nation and civilization itself has been weaponized across history and culture, and often it's been used as a justification to pillage and exploit people and their natural resources. And that's not true. And it was done in the name of civilization, but that's not actually what civilization is. Exploiting a power differential, abusing vulnerable people, that's not actually civilization. That's barbarism. That's the stuff of savagery. So the fact that the oldest story in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is about these ideas, about the themes of the transformative power of friendship, about our human nature and the duality of our human nature, shows that this is a timeless question, a timeless problem. Yet, as I learned while writing this book, the solution is also timeless. And the solution is civility. Civility is restraining the self, restraining the ego, the uglier parts of ourself, so we can thrive in relationship with others and in community. So we started a moment ago with the oldest book in the world, our oldest story in the world. Did you know that the oldest book in the world is a civility book? I know some of you are great books people. Have any of you heard of the oldest book in the world, the Maxims of Ptahhotep? Has anyone heard of this before? So Ptahhotep was an ancient Egyptian vizier. He was an advisor to Pharaoh, and he had been. Anyone here Hamilton fans? Anyone seen Hamilton? But Ptahhotep had been in the room where it happens his entire life. He had been, at the pinnacle of temporal and earthly and worldly success his entire life. And he was even offered the opportunity to become pharaoh, but turned it down in order to lead a quiet life of retirement. And while he was in retirement, he put pen to paper and he reflected on the timeless principles of human flourishing. And he wrote down these 37 maxims that he intended to give as a gift to Pharaoh's son, hoping that Pharaoh's son might become a wise and just ruler one day. And what's amazing is that these 37 maxims are timeless. They could be in a Judith Martin Miss Manners column today. So for example, Ptahhotep says, do not abuse a power differential. If you have authority over someone, be gracious and gentle to the vulnerable. Don't abuse it. Don't weaponize that. Ptahhotep says, do not be good to your friends and your neighbors just when you need something. Be good to them all the time, just because they're your friends and neighbors, just because they're people. Ptahhotep says in at least 4 or 5 different maxims, do not gossip. He says, don't slander. What's amazing is that we see these and many other maxims, these teachings, these sayings, they surface across history and across culture. And what unites them all is this idea of civility, restraint, restraining the ego, restraining the worst parts of who we are. So we can do this beautiful but fragile and very difficult thing called life together with others. In my book, I go from Ptahhotep to ancient Greece, Socrates, who was the Miss Manners of the ancient Greek world, to Daniel of Beccles, this forgotten epic poem in the etiquette genre from the Middle Ages to Erasmus of Rotterdam to Della Casa to George Washington and Aristotle's in there as well. And that sometimes these thinkers, they borrowed from one another. There was this core of human wisdom that was passed on and iterative and part of the canon. But very often, these thoughtful people came to these ideas independent of one another, because they just observed the human condition, they observed the human experience, and derived these principles from observation, like what works with what is conducive, what behavior is conducive to this thing called doing life together with others, and what is inimical, what detracts from this fragile human social project. So, timeless problem, timeless solution, what can we do about it? Well, I think that all of you here committed to the humanities is a part of the solution, an important part. It's part of the solution that I talk about in my book. I have a whole chapter on education. I talk about paideia. Raise your hand if you've heard this word paideia before. Paideia was this concept of education in ancient Greek culture. Paideia was, it meant education, but also culture. And it was this vision of education that entailed cultivating the fullness of our humanity, cultivating all aspects of who we are, mind, body, spirit, engaging our learning maths, geometry, astronomy, poetry, philosophy, rhetoric. This idea of bringing forth, this is what education means, literally. The word education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to call forth or to lead out. And that's what education at its best does. It brings forth the best within each of us. It unlocks our potential so we can better serve our communities, better serve others, and better lead a life of agency and freedom and of flourishing. And this idea of cultivating a well-rounded human being, good humans and good citizens, this idea of paideia found expression in the Roman world, in this idea of humanitas. And again, the same idea of bringing forth the best part of ourselves that we could be, future leaders. Granted, this was in a different time from today, where this was an education that was exclusive to men, and not to women, not to slaves, and not to many, ethnic and cultural minorities in this time. But the idea was to bring forth the best of our humanity and create a new class of leaders and of citizens. And in ancient Greek, the concept of paideia was linked to this word philanthropia. Any idea what philanthropia means? Pardon? Right, philanthropy. And the two words that comprise philanthropia are philo, which means, and anthropos, which is, anyone know? Love of humanity. That's exactly right. That's what philanthropy is. So the philanthropic project was part and parcel with the educational project. Like, what is the educational project? It is to cultivate our humanity, cultivate our humaneness, and to cultivate our appreciation of the high gift of being human, to cultivate our love of humanity, both the humanity that we possess and the humanity in others. And the idea was that the more that we cultivate our own humanity and come to appreciate the gift of what it means to be human, the more that we appreciate the humanity of those around us too. And we're going to be less likely to dehumanize and to be cruel, to be violent, to be malicious, to assume the worst. And that's really what my entire book is about. It is a humanistic manifesto in these barbaric and dehumanizing days that we live in, where we hear people all the time who are very quick to rationalize dehumanizing acts and conduct towards people that they differ from, or dehumanizing language towards people that they disagree with and differ from. And that's a very human tendency to do that. We've seen that across history and across culture, that we want to dehumanize the other that we don't differ from and disagree with, to rationalize doing and saying horrible things to them, to killing them. Because when we're not confronted with the fullness of their humanity, it's easier to do that. And what's the antidote to that tendency is to confront us with the beauty and the gift of personhood and being human. So of course, the humanitas in ancient Rome gives us our modern word humanities, right? It's the educational project that makes us human. And it's the art of being free as well, like the humanities and the liberal arts that were part and parcel together in ancient Greek. It's liberating us, this mode of education, from the ugly, worst aspects of who we are, the inner Gilgamesh, the inner tyrant, the inner libido dominandi, the impermitisse that is within each of us, and liberating us from that, freeing us from being enslaved to it, enslaved as Gilgamesh had been, enslaved as Dr. Jekyll was to the libido dominandi, freeing us from that so we can become fully human, fully free, and fully flourishing, achieving the best and highest life in relationship with others. This idea found expression in the Renaissance of this idea of paideia, of humanitas. It found expression in this idea of civility. And this was the education that was befitting future leaders. You know, it was ordering their loves, cultivating their souls, cultivating their love of beauty and of virtue, so that they would be wise and just rulers. And hopefully, this was the theory of social change of many of the scholars of the Renaissance period, was moral transformation of leaders that would have a trickle-down effect and morally transform society as well. But there is this conceptual lineage between ancient Greek paideia, philanthropia, humanitas, the arts liberalis, the liberating arts, and civility. And so in many ways, exactly what you're doing here today as in being part of the Great Books program, the humanities program, and asking big questions. What does it mean to be human? What is the best way to live? Questions of origin, purpose, and destiny. That is getting a true education, and that is becoming a better human and thinking deeply about these questions, about the best way to live, about the meaningful life, and encountering how thoughtful people across history and culture have answered those questions for themselves. No education is complete without having asked and answered these questions for themselves. And what's the best way to ask these questions is to engage how other people have answered them before, engaging with the wisdom, the minds that have come before you, the thoughtful people. You can disagree with them, but that refines it, helps you answer them for yourselves. And it's a tragedy that what you're doing here is a privilege. It's a privilege and a responsibility, and it's a tragedy that so many people today come away from high school and even multiple graduate degrees without having asked or answered these foundational questions for themselves, questions of origin, purpose, destiny, personhood, the nature of man, the nature of the good life. So I hope you feel privileged, and I hope you feel responsible that you are part of the solution to this, the antidote to these dehumanizing and barbaric times that we live in, is exactly the project that you're undertaking right now as humanities and Great Book students. Still, I mean, it can be so frustrating to look out at the world around us and wonder what our role is. You know, we see what's happening in the Middle East, we see what's happening, you know, the latest scandal, the latest catastrophe, and we feel helpless. What can just one person do? When I left government, and I call myself a refugee from federal government, I fled to Indianapolis, Indiana, where I live now. And I came home from work one day and said to my husband, I'm sick of Washington, I'm sick of government, let's move to Indiana, which is where he's from originally and where his family is. And my husband said to me, okay, sounds good, we'll move to Indiana, no take-backs. And we've been there ever since. We've been there about 5.5 years. And one of our first friends when we moved to Indiana was a woman named Joanna Taft. She came up to me after work one day and said, hi, or after church one day and said, hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime? And I had never heard the word porch used as a verb before, but we were curious and didn't know many people in the area. So we went to her porch that afternoon. And I realized that Joanna is staging this quiet porching revolution from her great big front veranda against our atomized, our divided, our dehumanizing, our barbaric status quo. I realized that, Joanna, she had, on her porch that day, she had curated people across race, across politics, across class, across geography, not to have a structured conversation across difference, but just to inhabit a shared space across difference. I mean, a big argument in my book is that this is a timeless problem, like this is not a now problem. A lot of thoughtful people today claim that We're uniquely divided, uniquely polarized, uniquely sad, uniquely rude, and there are reasons to be concerned about our division. And there's a reason I wrote this book now, in this moment. But it is a timeless problem. And yet, there are different social and cultural factors that are different today than past eras. For example, the ubiquity of the 24/7 news cycle, that we're just fed this steady diet of fear and anxiety and otherizing, reasons to be upset and mad and disdainful. Social media, we have unprecedented power in our pockets to not just offend people, whoever can hear us in shouting distance, but to even spread mistruths. Winston Churchill had this great line that the lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. And that was 70 years ago. And this is like far before the age of social media. That's even more true now, that one person's incendiary comment, one person's mistruth now has the chance to harm millions within moments. Another thing that's different is that it's very easy to go through life and not really encounter people that we don't want to encounter, people we differ from, people we just don't want to be around. That's true virtually. We can curate our virtual experience and weed out people that bother us, that we don't want to hear their ideas. But it's also true physically. In this era today, we go from our homes to our cars to our offices and back again, and we don't really have to encounter people that we don't want to encounter. We have Netflix delivered to us. We have our groceries delivered. In this age of digital nomads, you don't even have to leave the house for work anymore if you don't want to. And so that's what's revolutionary about what Joanna was doing on our front porch that day, just creating an oasis from the division, from the atomization, and for people to come together across difference, just as people, and to be seen and known and loved, just for who they are, which is what we deeply long for, every one of us at core. So we want more than anything. And I realized that Joanna, she had the right attitude, the right approach, that she recognizes she cannot change others. She can't change what's happening across the world, what's happening in Ottawa and Washington, but she can change herself. And she's choosing to reclaim her power, her civic sphere, her agency, and make the world a better and brighter place right from where she is. And there's incredible power in that. Nothing new under the sun, as I like to say, as the Hebrew Bible book of Ecclesiastes teaches us. But unknowingly, Joanna had never studied classical history, but unknowingly, Joanna was not doing something radically new or innovative. It might feel that way for this moment, and it's beautiful what she's doing, but 2,000 years ago, when Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome, he endowed 4 chairs of philosophy. For the Platonists, he endowed the Academy. For the Aristotelians, he endowed the Lyceum. For the Epicureans, he endowed the Garden. And for the Stoics, he endowed the Stoa. Does anyone know what the Stoa means? Front porch. It means porch. And so the Stoics, they lived in a similar time of existential crisis, of a time of pestilence, a time of war, a time of atomization, and unprecedented, I felt unprecedented conflict. And the Stoics had a similar approach. They said, I can't control what is happening around me. I can only control myself. And that by choosing to be different, how I act, how I live my life every day, that maybe I can change the world. And that's exactly what Joanna and thousands like her across our world are doing today. They're saying, whether they have a front porch or not, they're saying, I am going to use what I have and lead a life of civility, of wanting to transform the outsider to insider, stranger to the friend, to be different. I've spoken with people who use coffee shops, who use their front lawn, who use their front stoop, who use, lounge on their college campuses. That this is just an oasis, a place for you to feel seen and known and loved. It could be a front porch if you have one, but you don't have to have one. It's about carrying with you the disposition of civility in order to make the world a better place. And we woefully underappreciate the power we each have to be different, and how being different can make our world better. But there's a reason I wrote this book for you, for everyday Canadians who are tired of the division and would like a brighter and better vision of the good. I wrote this book to empower you. I hope it's an encouragement. I hope it's a call to action that, you know, and the more of us who choose to reclaim the soul civility that we might be able to change the world. So I really appreciate you guys having me here to talk a little bit about the book, and now I'd love to hear from you about some of your anxieties and fears about the divisions, about the problems facing our world. But I can't wait for you to read the book. Thanks so much to Matt and the Institute for Liberal Studies for buying books for students and for reaching out and facilitating this conversation. Thanks to Carleton for providing this august classroom to have this dialogue. And thanks to you for being here, more importantly. Like, I can't believe it's 4:30 and it's dark outside. Like, I feel like we should all be in bed right now. It's so cold. But you're here, so thank you for being here. I'd love to hear from you.